16th Finance Commission Macro Fiscal Framework. The session will be chaired by Professor Sudipto Mandal and features 4 distinguished panelists. Before getting into the session, I would like to briefly introduce our chair and panelists. Our chair, Professor Sudipto Mandal, is a distinguished economist with an illustrious career spanning global policy and academia. He currently serves as a chairman of the board at Center for Development Studies. He has held prestigious academic roles, including RBI Chair, Professor at National Institute of Public Finance and Policy, and Distinguished Fellow at National Council of Applied Economic Research. His public service is highlighted by his tenure as a member of the 14th Finance Commission, as an economic advisor to the India's Ministry of Finance. He also spent nearly 2 decades at Asian Development Bank, retiring as the Director of Strategy and Policy Department. A prolific contributor to the fiscal and monetary policy, his expertise in development economics and governance remains a cornerstone of India's economic thought. Next, we have our esteemed panelists. Let me introduce Professor D.K. Srivastava, the Honorary Professor at Madras School of Economics and Chief Policy Advisor at EY India, a distinguished economist with over 4 decades of expertise in macroeconomic policies and public finance. He specializes in the fiscal federalism, government subsidies, and state finances. Professor Srivastava's career is defined by the extraordinary institutional contribution to India's Finance Commission. He served as a member of the Advisory Council to the 16th Finance Commission and formerly the 15th, having previously served as a member of the 12th Finance Commission, principal consultant to the 11th, and economic advisor to the 10th. His leadership roles including serving as the director of Madras School of Economics and holding senior professorships at National Institute of Public Finance and Policy and Banaras Hindu University. Professor Srivastava has chaired several high-level bodies, including National Statistical Commission's Committee on Fiscal Statistics and RBI Working Group on State Fiscal Responsibility legislations. He is a widely published author on tax devolution, debt sustainability, and evolving dynamics of center-state financial relations in India. Professor N.R. Bhanumurthy is the director of Madras School of Economics. He was founding vice chancellor of the Dr. B.R. Ambedkar School of Economics, University in Bangalore. He served as a professor at National Institute of Public Finance and Policy in New Delhi. He also held roles as the assistant and associate professor at Institute of Economic Growth, Delhi. His career includes the roles of the macroeconomist at UNEC CAP in Bangkok and UNDP Regional Center for the Asia Pacific in Colombo. His consulting experience include work with ILO, World Bank, and Asian Development Bank. He is widely recognized for his expertise in public finance, macroeconomics, monetary policy, fiscal policy, and development economics. Professor M. Suresh Babu is an esteemed academician and researcher specializing in applied macroeconomics, trade and industrial economics and development economics. He currently serves as the director of MIDS Chennai since 2024. Previously, he held faculty position at renowned institutions such as IIT Madras and ISEC Bangalore. His extensive research has been published in top journals including Journal of Public Affairs, Journal of Development Studies and Structural Changes and Economic Dynamics. His works explore critical issues such as premature deindustrialization, income inequality, and the impact of trade on emerging economies. With a career spanning over 2 decades, his contributions significantly shaped the contemporary economic and policy discussions. Dr. Ranjit P.S. serves as the assistant professor at Gulati Institute of Finance and Taxation. His academic and research interests span public finance, macro fiscal policy, applied econometrics, development economics, and financial economics. He earned his PhD from the Madras School of Economics, where his doctoral research focused on the sustainability, fiscal coordination, and growth implication on the subnational debt in India. His works contribute to the broader understanding of the fiscal dynamics and policy effectiveness at the state level. Before joining into the GIFT, Dr. Ranjit served as the assistant professor of economics at CRISE, deemed to be University, Bengaluru. He has also held researcher positions in the Center for Development Studies and Madras School of Economics, where he contributed to the several policy-oriented research projects supported by the institutes such as ICCR, 15th Finance Commission, and UNICEF. Now, over to the chair, Professor Sudipto Mandal.
Thank you. First of all, can I be heard, by the way? Yeah. Uh, we are slightly compromised because 3 of the 4 panelists could not be here on time, but they're all there online. So most of this panel discussion will be held online. Let me begin by thanking GIFT for inviting me to this very important and timely conference on the 16th Finance Commission. I am particularly happy because both the director of GIFT, Professor Joseph, and our inaugural address speaker, Hasib Drabu, have been, as they were mentioning, associated as former alumni of the Center for Development Studies, with which I have had also many years of association. So that gives me special pleasure in being here today. And Hasib, as was expected, always speaks, beyond, sort of lateral thinking person and very forceful speaker. And he didn't, of course, disappoint us today either. So thank you again, Joseph. I also want to mention that I was looking at the list of participants, and I find that another institution looms very large in this, which I'm also associated, have been, that is the National Public Finance and Policy. Uh, at least half of, or more, maybe 70% of the participants in this conference, apart from the participants of GIFT, in-house participants, have been, either are or have been on the faculty of the National Public Finance and Policy. Several of them, including Professor Gunda Rao, who is present right here, who have been directors of that institution, Pinaki and so on. Now, that's again a source of great pleasure for those of us who have been, part of the NIPFP family. But it is also a matter of concern that in a field like public finance, and especially when we're talking about the 16th Finance Commission, the spread of domain expertise is so narrow that between, if you leave out GIFT and NIPFP, there's hardly anybody else. There are 4 or 5, the few people you can count on your fingers who are there. And this is something that we have to think seriously about what to do, that such an important field, discipline of economics, is not getting the sort of attention it deserves. And I just want to mention in this, Joseph, that NIPFP has a disadvantage. There's a great tradition that it doesn't have students, it doesn't have a teaching. You have that. So I think we need to really, so that you did mention that your alumni are now spreading, and hopefully that will go forward. Now, coming to the subject of today's discussion, I find that all the finance, we look at them from the 1st to the 16th, there have generally been a tendency of continuity and change. And I have a slightly different view on this from Hasib, because my view is that sometimes finance commissions have tilted in one direction or another direction, but generally they have tried to navigate a very, how should I say, non-partisan path between the interests of the center and all the states, and in the allocation in the horizontal division formula among the states. This finance commission, the 16th, I think makes a departure, as Mr. Chandrasekhar mentioned in his chair's address, in the sense that both in terms of the, and this came out very prominently also in Hasib's presentation, in both the matter of transfers, and I just don't mean devolution, but transfers between center and states, as well as in the allocation devolution, horizontal division formula, it has opted in terms of a much more, how should I say, a centralizing kind of perspective. And under the name of so-called efficiency, as I will argue in a minute, we have shifted the devolution shares of states in favor of the larger and stronger states at the cost of the poorer states, and especially the states in the northeastern hill states and so on, which used to be called special category states. Now, we have very experienced panelists to discuss all the details. But just to make my point, I'll just make two illustrative remarks. One on how on the vertical transfers, and the other on the horizontal allocations. Now, on the vertical issue, the 16 Finance Commission has stuck to the 41%. And that has now more or less become, I mean, the 14th Finance Commission said 52, but then J&K was taken out of the pool of states for allocation, so it became 41. And I think the last two commissions have stuck with that. So that has become kind of a norm. However, two things are happening that, and as Hasib was emphasizing, it is 41% of a pool which is increasingly a smaller part of total transfers, because you're keeping out cess and surcharges out of this, and that share has been growing up. The other is that the grants, the revenue deficit grants, have been taken away. So net result is that you have got now, all the finance over time, and this is why I said I had a slightly different view from Hasib, that over time, if you see the transfers as part of the total revenues had actually been going up. It peaked, of course, with the 14th Finance Commission when this was raised to 35.6%. It was marginally reduced by the 14th Finance Commission to a little under 35%. But now, in the 16th Finance Commission, this has been quite sharply reduced. I'm talking about share of total central revenue before devolution. So that is a problem, and I think D.K. Srivastava, who's on this panel, he and Dr. Rangan have written an article on this, on how the share has come down. So this is a reversal of trend, I would say. The other thing, a couple of supplementary points on the centralist view. The 16th Finance Commission report is very critical of the states, giving lots of freebies. And indeed, I think it's a race to the bottom, all this we're doing. But compared to the states, a huge amount of freebies being given by the central government in through number of programs and so on. And I think Professor Govindara has written on that. And not a comment on this, no critical remarks as far as the center is concerned. And finally, coming to these centrally sponsored schemes, as Hasib was mentioning, you take away the formula-based allocation of devolution. You then move to these, and now you stop grants also, the major part of grants. So you get increasingly dependent on centrally sponsored schemes. According to some estimate, nearly half of the transfers are now taking this form, which are discretionary. They squeeze the fiscal space of the states because it's a shared, centrally sponsored schemes are shared. The states meet a large part of that, and for priorities of the central government, which incidentally increasingly encroaching into the what are assigned areas, subjects of the states under the 7th schedule. So from all these perspectives, you kind of, and actually, verbalized it. I was going to say, it's as if this Finance Commission, which is supposed to be an impartial body, adjudicating in center and states, is now seeing things very much through a centralist lens. And he used the appropriate term. He said, virtually become an agent of the central states. Now, coming to the other point I wanted to make, which is about the horizontal transfers. Apart from the conventional criteria that have been used in the past in the allocation, such as population, development, etc., one new thing that they have introduced is what they call contribution. Now, what is this contribution? It is the share of the state GSDP in total GSDP. Uh, Now, and of course, they take the square root of this. But what this means is that you essentially bias the allocations in favor of the larger, stronger, more developed states as against the poorer and weaker states. So, if you look at what has happened, and this we will see later on today, I think in Pinaki's presentation in the afternoon, a number of the poorer states have now lost their share, and I'm just going to read out some of those. Rajasthan, Chhattisgarh, Bihar, Odisha, UP, West Bengal, Madhya Pradesh. These are the normal states, and then all these northeastern hill states who are very dependent on transfer center, they have all lost out to their shares. So this is again in the name of so-called equity shifting away. I mean, in the name of efficiency, shifting away completely from the equity considerations. Now, Kerala, you remarked on this, Chandrasekhar, they got a slight increase in their share. I think about something like half a percent increase, and I'm sure the state government very happy about this. But you no longer have the the revenue deficit grants. So all in all, I think we have seen a directional change, to borrow his terms, but a directional change of a very unfortunate direction. But let me stop there. We have very experienced panelists with great domain expertise, much more than me, and let us now listen to them. Uh, Let me follow the same order as in the program. So, DK, let's start with you, Professor DK Srivastava.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Professor Mandal. Distinguished members on the panel, distinguished participants. Let me begin by congratulating the organizers of this conference, particularly for choosing this particular theme for this session on macro fiscal framework. Usually, when we discuss the scheme of fiscal transfers, many of those discussions remain focused on just the vertical and horizontal dimensions of transfers. Local bodies may be a little bit on natural calamities. But the underlying macro fiscal framework is of critical importance and often remains under discussed. So we have a very critical view of the underlying macro fiscal framework that was employed by the 16th Finance Commissions. And there are certain aspects that I would like to highlight as we go along, certain deficiencies, in fact. So let me say that such a framework is important if we have to have a very robust scheme of fiscal transfers. I will take you through a set of slides and emphasize certain points. For example, here in the third bullet, I say, at the macro level, the system of transfers should be designed such as to lead to revenue account balance for both tiers of government, with limited variations and sustainability of fiscal deficit and debt for the central government, the aggregate of state governments, and for individual state governments. Using realistic assumptions and accommodating reasonable variations due to their capacity and cost differentials that are beyond their control. That is the role of an underlying robust macro fiscal framework. Now, the Commission does have a certain macro fiscal framework, but it is characterized by considerable deficiencies, as I would point out. And the first one that I highlight is with reference to their take on the macro and the fiscal part of the central finances, which I think is there in the next slide. Can we go to the next slide, please? Yeah. So here on the GDP side, GDP growth I am showing, and that is for their forecast period or award period. There is a set of 5 numbers that are all 11%. As far as macro part of the macro fiscal framework is concerned, this is the beginning and the end of their macro framework. the Commission's macro framework. That is all they have to say. There is no analysis of saving and investment leading to any real growth. There is no analysis of the role of implicit price deflator. There is no role of saving and investment balances in determining sustainable combinations of fiscal deficit and debt, and so on. So the macro story is limited to that one line, 11% nominal GDP growth. That's the end of it. There is more on the fiscal side, but that is also characterized by certain features that disturb us. Now, look at the CGST buoyancy of the base of the first year of their award period at 1.96. After that, it tapers down. But that's a very high buoyancy in the first year of award. And the very fact that this is such a high buoyancy in the presence of a major revenue eroding GST reforms that were undertaken by the central government while the commission was in session. That those reforms came out in September. The commission's report was submitted in November. They had plenty of time in order to moderate their projections and include the revenue reducing effect of GST reforms. But that, of course, they were not able to do because of the way they had cast their macro fiscal framework. Now, the projections, I would not take you through the other lines, but just look at revenue deficit. The center is shown to have a revenue deficit in the first 4 years, and only in the last year there is a surplus. And then fiscal deficit is also going down and stabilizing at 3.5% by the last year of their award period. Those are the imbalance profiles given by the commission as far as the union finances are concerned. Now let us go also to the state finances. Next slide. Here again, same thing, sum of GSDP, which is assumed to be equal to GDP, all 11%. We are showing only growth here. Revenue receipts growths are given, but there is a lot of missing in terms of the base year. Revenue expenditure is shown to grow at a moderate rate, ranging between 7.7 to 8.4%. And then there is revenue deficit, and the states are shown to be in revenue surplus. In 4 of the 5 years, only in the base year, that is 21st year, there is a deficit. This deficit or surplus is the outcome of an assumed buoyancy. Of course, they don't show us the tax projections. They only, in the written framework, they give some idea as to what buoyancies they assumed. But they do not tell us what is the actual outcome of the when they sum up the tax revenue performance of all the states and so on. Lot of that is hidden. They only give us revenue receipts. And then they give us the revenue deficit and revenue surplus profiles. And fiscal deficit also is not given here. Now, in this framework, there are 2 or 3 basic deficiencies. First, the way they calculate the effective interest rate requires the level of current outstanding liabilities. Current outstanding liabilities can be determined if you have the current fiscal deficit. Current fiscal deficit can be determined if you have the current interest payments. And current interest payments can be determined if you have the effective interest rate. So we have a vicious circle here. This is a static framework. And in this static framework, everything is exogenous. The fiscal deficit profiles are all exogenous, provided from outside. And the only thing that is getting generated here is revenue deficit. But revenue deficit cannot be calculated in this way because interest payments are involved. And therefore, this is all fictional, I would say. They feed in the assumptions, and those assumptions are leading to the revenue deficit profile of the states. They show there is revenue surplus, and therefore, it would be justified later on to say that no revenue deficit grants are recommended for the states. So they are building up a case through this macro fiscal framework so as to delete the revenue deficit grants for the states. That seems to be the underlying feature why they built a static framework. And what is even surprising is, as compared to all the earlier finance commissions, there is a lot of hidden information. It's like I often consider this is like a traditional Indian bride. We can't see the full face. There is a long informational ghungat, as it were. It's all covered, and we can surmise as to what they might have done. So that is the beginning of the thing. But as luck would have it, these projections, macro fiscal projections, had have a shelf life of 0 days, because the very feature, the fact that made the commission's report published is also the feature that makes it redundant, which is the Government of India budget of 26-27. The moment that budget came, the buoyancy assumption about GST was thrown out of the window, and the growth rate assumption also for the base year and the first year also became much lower. As a result, we have now a 25-26, which is the base year, only 8% nominal growth. 26-27, only 10%, not 11% anymore. And the CGST buoyancy is 0.63, 1/3 of what they assumed. And as a result of that, even if we maintain the rest of their assumptions about growth and the buoyancy, overall buoyancy of gross tax, central tax revenues averages 1.09. So we maintain that. We maintain the CGST buoyancy. And just these two changes in the base year and the first year in nominal growth and overall gross tax buoyancy leads to a completely different outcome for the revenue deficit, fiscal deficit, and so on. So now, of course, I made the whole thing simultaneous so that we can properly determine interest payments and fiscal deficit as emanating out from the macro fiscal framework. So now you find that the revenue deficit now is appearing in all the years. It is not, it is much lower than what was given in the original forecast. Fiscal deficit is different, and it is now falling, although falling, but it is not settling at 3.5, it is close to 4%. Outstanding liabilities are also much higher than what the commission projected. So this is only as a result of two changes, only in 26-27. But more happened. And of course, we also look at these two changes and look at the state profile. So we go to the next slide. And in the state profile, making those changes, here we are only showing the growth rates. I maintain all the other growth rates and so on. And you find that the revenue deficit, now states are not showing surplus like they showed earlier. It's first 4 years, they are all in revenue deficit. This is a revenue deficit, I must also point out, which is the net of revenue deficits of deficit states and surplus of surplus states. There is no such thing as aggregate revenue deficit of all states. Revenue surpluses of surplus states cannot be set aside revenue deficits of deficit states. Revenue deficit of deficit states would be much larger than these amounts that are shown here. And therefore, the case for not giving revenue deficit is gone even before, as soon as the budget of the central government came out. The other thing is that the commission did not distinguish between SGST and non-SGST of the state taxes. Now, they have argued that there is a lot of scope for augmenting state tax revenues. But really, on SGST, there is hardly any scope. GST, SGST, and so on is being determined by the GST Council, which is dominated by the central government. And although states may have a party to those reforms, the revenue eroding reforms, but they don't have a control on this. So if the buoyancy of that has gone down, then obviously states cannot show the kind of buoyancy that they have assumed. And that actually reflects. So we made a distinction between SGST and non-SGST. As you know, I was also advising this commission, and I told them time and again that there is a strong case for distinguishing between SGST vis-a-vis other state taxes. But they chose not to accommodate that suggestion, and they were not in a position then to accommodate this distinction, although that policy change happened in there while they were still active. So that is the outcome of that. And then the whole profile of revenue deficit changes by just these two changes in the GOI 26-27 budget. But after that, more has happened. So it is dated because of the budget, but it is irrelevant because of the other changes. So we quickly go to the other changes. I have listed 4 revision of base year in national income series that happened, which brought the level of nominal GDP down. Then there is a second supplementary demand for grants, a very huge demand, and that is amounting to about 2 lakh crores. Impact of higher global crude prices uh, as a result of what is happening, and the impact of 8th pay commission, about which the commission does not talk about. Once you accommodate that, the revenue deficit of states increases much more. Fiscal deficit also increases, both for the center and the states. Everybody is now in revenue deficit in all the years, and everybody is in much larger fiscal deficit. So the framework that they developed was static and shallow, and they could not accommodate changes that happened even as they were still active. But after that, more important changes happened, and now the whole macro fiscal profile has been thrown out of the window. It's not relevant anymore. It is dated and irrelevant. Then, after this, let us go to their how it affected their framework of fiscal consolidation. Now, they hardly have any meaningful discussion of the whole issue of sustainability of fiscal consolidation. They have exogenous paths for fiscal deficit and debt profiles. Fiscal deficit profile is all provided from outside. They choose a path and then develop the debt profile. That's all that they do. There is no discussion of sustainability, which was done by the 12th Finance Commission, in which Dr. Rangarajan and I were involved. And we linked that whole analysis to the supply and demand of investable resources. That's how we get the sustainable levels. There is an infirmity or inconsistency in Center's FRBM of 2018. And the whole idea, the discussion that is going on right now, that we will choose a debt GDP path, is also very inconsistent, because the debt and fiscal deficit profiles must be simultaneously determined given a nominal GDP growth. The Commission observes that as far as debt GDP ratios are concerned, India is in a very comfortable position compared to global peers. But I think that is also wrongly placed, because they are looking at debt GDP ratio and not looking at the burden of interest payments relative to revenue receipts. Our interest rates are much higher than advanced economies, nearly 3.5 times as high. And our revenue receipt to GDP ratio is much lower. So if you look at this part of the analysis, I will not develop it here, but our burden in terms of interest payments is nearly 4.5 times. I would leave this topic by saying that their analysis is almost entirely exogenous and very shallow. So then we move to the next slide. Now, this is the main point that I really want to emphasize. The Commission chose a rigid number of 41%, as Sudipto had pointed out. The article that governs this actually does not provide any such limitation. It says such percentage, that is the vertical dimension. That 41% can even change year to year in any financial year. And then says shall be distributed among the states in such manner as may be prescribed. There is no mention of any devolution formula, any ratio, any population per capita GSDP, nothing. It's a very open-ended design that has been provided by the Constitution. And the Constitution provides also another article. It is Article 275. Look at that language. There is no revenue deficit in this language. It says Parliament may determine to be in need of assistance, and different sums may be fixed for different states. In other words, in order to address the call of this article, the Commission should have provided exactly the need of assistance, and if its answer is zero everywhere, then that should be out of its estimates of those needs. It cannot say from outside no revenue deficit. There is no revenue deficit that is being argued here. Actually, this is a beautiful and very effective provision of fiscal transfers, and the two read together provide a very complete system of fiscal transfers. I write that identity: assessed revenue need of a state, assessed normatively determined revenue need grant of a state is equal to assessed expenditure need of that state minus share of central taxes given through their devolution formula minus assessed own revenue receipts. There is no mention of revenue deficit here, revenue deficit grants. What the Commission is supposed to do is to assess normatively this revenue need grant of a state. And they are required by that article to specify for each year, for each state, what is that assessed revenue need. If it is zero, so it may be. But that should emerge out of the explicit mention of that estimate. The terms of reference of the 14th Finance Commission and 15th Finance Commission, I just quote there. Commission shall indicate the basis on which it has arrived at its finding and make available the state-wise estimates of receipts and expenditures. That's the two clauses for 14th and 15th. These clauses were omitted, but the article is there, may determine to be in need of assistance, and different sums may be fixed for different states. This whole thing was ignored, and from outside they say revenue deficit grant. So that means that the Commission could not address the call of Article 275. It failed to meet its constitutional duty, in my view. Now, what is the outcome of this? Let me go. I'm going to finish this. One slide on vertical and one slide on horizontal. Now, as Sudipto said, in the 14th Finance Commission, there was an upsurge in the share of the states, and I am looking at total trends in total transfers as percent of GOIs pre-transfer revenue receipts. And the top curve shows that was stable at around 40%. Last year of 13th Finance Commission, because of some change in the way accounting was being done, and after that, the 14th Finance Commission, it reached a peak in the COVID year. The non-FC transfers increased further. And after that, the ground was fully recovered by the central government in 7 steps. Progressively increasing non-shareable cesses and surcharges, reducing GOIs share, and so on and so forth. The 4th, 5th, and 6th are the contributions of the 16th Finance Commission. So the argument that actually the Commission was really only listening to the central government, and it was enabling central government to restore their pre-14th Finance Commission, which has now been fully restored and maybe more than fully restored. And the last bit came when this MNREGA was substituted by this VBG Ramji, and there the last nail was actually put in, and therefore the center has regained all lost ground, if not more. On the horizontal, let me say, so the whole idea of the 16th Finance Commission was to enable this. Now, on the horizontal transfers, as Sudipto also said, there is a well-established macro policy model, which was given by Tinbergen, which said that if you have independent objectives of macro policy formulation, then you should have n independent instruments. If you have two objectives, equity and efficiency, then you should have two independent instruments. You cannot use the same instrument, that is per capita GSDP, for both achieving equity and efficiency. That efficiency, one does not know what that is about. It really, if you introduce that per capita GSDP with a minus sign for equity and a plus sign for a regressive scheme of transfers, then all that does is to reduce the equity aspect of fiscal transfers, horizontal fiscal transfers. And that is what has happened. That is square root gave rise to an extreme distortion in the middle income ranges. There is an upward regressive tail at the higher end of per capita GSDP. It's a strange conceptualization or determination of horizontal fiscal transfers that happened after huge amount of literature that has preceded this commission. To make such basic mistakes is very difficult to really understand. So now I'll conclude by just taking you through one slide. The purpose of transfer is that given increasing inequality in fiscal capacities across states, that's the first chart. Empirically, it is shown in terms of Gini coefficient that the inequality in per capita nominal GSDP has been increasing over time. That is to say, fiscal capacity, per capita fiscal capacities, more and more inequality is being delivered by the market system. Given that the idea of fiscal transfer that affects only a small part of movement of resources should be to ensure, at least in terms of publicly provided public and merit services, greater equality. This is the right-hand curve shows that downward trend. That is to say, up to the 15th Finance Commission, at least we were able to achieve this objective. I suspect that this objective is no more going to be satisfied because of the eroded inequality in the horizontal transfers. Lastly, I would say, this is the next slide, and that's where I conclude. I say that actually the macro fiscal framework points all the weaknesses of this commission's framework, methodological frameworks. It has a shelf life of 0 days. It is not relevant. Even on the first day, it was not relevant. The second is the answer to Article 270, 41%, zero change. Answer to Article 275, you write 28 times 000. That is all that they are doing. And they are not showing how that is going to appear. And then the horizontal aspect of Article 270, ad hoc tinkering with the weights, ad hoc incorporation of a per capita GSDP working in opposite ways. How can such a formulation be there? Given their preference of 0, if you were to ask me, how would I rank the award of the 16th Finance Commission? I would say give them their favorite number. Thank you very much.
Thank you, DK, for that very comprehensive and detailed presentation you have made of the macro framework. And of course, your concluding certificate that you give them an award of 0 is absolutely devastating. So thanks very much.
Thank you.
Bhanu,
Thank you.
would like to speak now? Bhanu, are you there?
Yes, sir, I'm here.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Can I share my slide?
Screen share? Yeah.
Either the slides are there? Hello, okay. The slides are there?
Yes, we can see.
Yeah. First of all, let me thank Dr. Joseph and GIFT for giving me this opportunity to be part of this discussion on 16th Finance Commission. I know many of the audience there, they would have heard this presentation sometime back. This is the fourth time I'm presenting, so there's a little bit of repetition. But most importantly, I think after listening to Professor D.K. Srivastava, who has done a very, comprehensive presentation on the macro fiscal framework, I thought my presentation is going to be more repetition on some of those points that Dr. Srivastava already pointed out. For the sake of completion, I just thought let me put up some slides on other aspects of the Finance Commission. Again, Dr. Srivastava pointed out in terms of the main contributions of the 16th Finance Commission report. There are some changes on the horizontal devolution, particularly when upfront, I want to tell that at a macro level, I was a little bit happy than Dr. Srivastava in terms of bringing some kind of efficiency parameter into the whole devolution formula. But the way they brought it, I think is questionable. And again, as Dr. Srivastava pointed in the last slide, the whole issue of efficiency by getting into this contribution of GDP is again very questionable. Maybe they should have done some other relevant variables than the contribution of GDP, and especially by taking the square root. And I think that is something almost smoothens the efficiency. In that sense, it doesn't really bring in the kind of efficiency that they talk about. In terms of revenue deficit grants, they are discontinued, and they also talk about the kind of time inconsistency problem. Of course, there are many members who are there who are worked in the Finance Commission. I think the whole revenue deficit grants, the way that is estimated, in fact, it was a black box. In that sense, discontinuing of revenue deficit grants, whether it's a good or bad, I think one can really discuss. Again, as the previous speaker pointed out, I think it has been part of the constitutional prescription. In terms of the revenue deficit grants, the Commission said that incentive to undertake difficult but necessary fiscal reforms, such as rationalization of subsidies, improving tax administration, and curbing revenue expenditures, actually weakened. In fact, Dr. Mandal, you made a reference to how there's no comment on the center, but I think if you look at the states, I had some experience working at the state fiscal issues. You do see that there is a whole kind of a mess in terms of the number of schemes and number of lines in the budget compared to the central government. In fact, one of the states that I was looking at, there was something like 1,800 schemes in one state. So, given that kind of situation, assessing the revenue requirement of that state becomes extremely difficult. On the macro framework, Dr. Srivastava very eloquently pointed out, the Commission expect actually it should come down to 73.1% at the general government level, while retaining 3% fiscal deficit at the states and 3.5% at the union. In fact, the 0.5% is actually get transferred to the states. It should be reverse of that, because the 0.5% is the SASKI scheme. So including the SASKI scheme, the center is expected to have 3.5% by the end of the 16th Finance Commission period. And I think across the report, they assume the nominal GDP growth of 11%. We all know what is the actual for the next year. So in that sense, I think Professor Srivastava's point of, the whole recommendation stayed only for 0 days is almost valid, because the union government itself is assuming 10.5% for the next financial year. On the vertical devolution, I think this particular table, table 7.4. In fact, in the past there is a lot of discussion about the states don't receive as per the Finance Commission recommendations. But I think that particular table they put up it very nicely, and they show that after two adjustments to the devolution that generally happens, the actual devolution to the states is exactly same as the Finance Commission recommendation of 41%. So in that sense, the final numbers for each year will come almost after 1 year. So if you can wait for 1 year, you know that the actual devolution is not very different from the Finance Commission recommendations. In terms of cess and surcharges, the report duly acknowledged that due to this the devolution has reduced. But then their argument that the devolution is actually similar to 13th Finance Commission period. I think that is not valid in that sense. I mean, in that sense, you don't see the change in the devolution after 13th Finance Commission. They also argue that there is no case for higher devolution because of cess and surcharges, because the states are actually having sufficient funds for developmental activities. Again, these are empirical questions. I think one need to really look at it a little more detail. On the horizontal devolution, as I said, equity and efficiency has been the two drivers of that whole policy. But I think in terms of contribution of GDP as a criteria, I think again, in one of our discussion with the 16th Finance Commission, we were suggesting different variables. But I think they have taken a easy route of taking contribution of GDP as a efficiency parameter. It's also not very clear when it states the contribution of GDP serves as a surrogate for efficiency basis. So I think that is certainly a major point of contention, whether GDP alone is sufficient for measuring efficiency. And we say that tax base is not really a tax effort. In fact, we talk about tax effort as one of the criteria for devolution, but taking the nominal GDP as tax effort is certainly not is an acceptable one. Income distance and GDP contribution, is there any correlation? I think that is one thing we argued in one of our presentation to 16th Finance Commission. And expenditure efficiency should be the focus, but not the production efficiency. I think we should get into a kind of a outlay and outcome framework. In fact, one of our studies to the 15th Finance Commission, where we actually estimated the level of public expenditure efficiency at the state level. We have provided those numbers. Of course, it needs some re-estimation, but I think at least those framework, it should have been used compared to just using the production efficiency for tax effort. We also suggested something on GST efficiency. Again, we didn't have much data about it, but I think that would have been one way to look at efficiency. Traditionally, we used to use incremental capital output ratios, leave alone for states. Right now, even at the central government union level, we don't have such estimates. I think these are some of the areas where the researchers can really pick up and see whether we can estimate state level incremental capital output ratios, so that that can become a variable for efficiency parameters. There are some studies by the Reserve Bank of India where state level product efficiencies, productivities has been estimated under the CLEMS project. Of course, right now we only have 15 states, but I think again, these are the things where we could have looked at when it comes to efficiency parameter. On the revenue deficit grants, I think this is one thing that I thought purely for the sake of looking from the macro forecasting perspective. I think the whole exercise of forecasting GSDP for the next 5 years is a Herculean task. I think many of the members who are here, they were part of it. But I think that is one thing which always surprised in the past, how a commission can really estimate GSDP for next 5 years. And we were looking for those data, but it never was put up in the public domain. So in that sense, I think this commission has almost ended that whole exercise. In terms of this is something I mean, I just put up the recent trends in basically between the previous commission and the current commission, the equity efficiency ratio has actually shifted from 75-25 to 70-30. I think they argue that it's a gradual competitive federalism. So that is one thing I'm not really sure what should be the right ratio for a competitive federalism that they're talking about. I just put up that graph. If you look at how the square root smoothens the GSDP, shares, where the blue line is actuals, and if you take the square root, the shares actually smoothens. So in a sense, if the whole purpose is to smoothen, I thought contribution of GDP need not be a right variable for efficiency parameters. These are the changes in the shares. I'll skip this where I think Dr. Mandal also already pointed out where Karnataka, Kerala, and other states have benefited. So I just skip this point. On the macro fiscal roadmap, the question that Dr. Srivastava actually raised, it is actually there in my report, which we submitted to the 16th Finance Commission. It is there in the Finance Commission website. Some of the issues he talked about in terms of the oil price shock, in terms of the impact of the 8th Pay Commission, all of them have been estimated and presented to the 16th Finance Commission. And unfortunately, there is no reference to those assessments. I think in terms of the debt target, there was some confusion that it deviates from what the union budget has actually adopted. But if you look at the 16th Finance Commission, so they actually taken that 47.6%, which they gave in the last year budget as the target for the central government, with an assumption of 11% GDP for the next 5 years. In terms of the combined debt, it's supposed to come down to 60. This is one thing I thought I will highlight here. If you look at the last part of that particular chapter, the long-term fiscal roadmap, actually, the whole assessment of the 16th Finance Commission, when you take it to FY 43, they actually say that the public debt of the states will actually go up to 32.1%. This is something which we think we need to really look at, while the central government debt will actually come down to 38.8%. So the adjustment, which intrinsically in their macro fiscal framework, but we don't know how it has come up, it does say that there is a space for the states actually going to grow up from right now 25.5% to 32.1% by the end of FY 43. So in that sense, it looks like that 30-30 that we talked about during the FRBM review committee, maybe we are coming closer to that as per the 16th Finance Commission recommendations. In terms of FRLs, we had generally we do hear that it is the union which always deviated from the FRBM roadmap. But I think this report actually brings out details about how many states are actually not really sticking to the FRLs that is being. So in that sense, it is not just the union, but it's also states. There are many states who actually have huge discrepancy in terms of their fiscal responsibility legislations things. There are no reference to revenue deficit targets. Of course, as Dr. Srivastava estimated that. But the original FRBM Act actually had some distinction between capital expenditure and revenue deficit. So in a sense, that distinction is still needed, in my view, to really improve the quality of expenditures. Only at the states, they say that states will have revenue balance, but I think they don't really suggest anything at this union government level. In terms of the off-budget borrowings, I think there's so much discussion in that particular chapter, chapter number 12. I think while the union government is actually bringing so much of transparency when it comes to off-budget borrowings, I think there are concerns about the state level where there are a number of issues when it comes to off-budget borrowings. I think somewhere passingly they talk about we need to have a different definition of fiscal deficit as well as debt, so that you bring in that off-budget borrowing also as part of the calculation. So maybe they are talking about something like effective fiscal deficit. So there's something else or something else that they have in their mind. In terms of yields, I think this is one thing which has come out in the economic survey also, that when it comes to the cost of borrowing for the general government level is actually higher than when it compared with even Indonesia. I think with a similar kind of ratings between the countries, I think India actually borrows at a higher interest rate than a country like Indonesia. But in fact, the report argues that is happening largely because of the quality of public debt at the state level, and that is one reason which is actually affecting the sovereign borrowing at a national level. I think this is my last slide. Again, there are little bit of repetition. 11% nominal GDP growth is nowhere there. I think right now we talk about 10.5 or 10%. And now if you take the current oil price shock as well as other issues, maybe the nominal GDP growth even for FY27 will be lower than the 10%. So we need to look at that. But in terms of macro fiscal framework, again, as Dr. Srivastava pointed out, there is no inbuilt mechanism to derive the growth rate as well as debt as well as deficits. Again, as I said, our report contained those kind of simultaneously determining all these three numbers. So that is again missing from the report. In terms of the 8th Pay Commission, as I said, the overall fiscal, I mean, this is similar to the 14th Finance Commission. Even the 14th Finance Commission did a similar thing. And that's one of the reasons the 14th Finance Commission FRB roadmap also very short-lived. And I think this is going to happen to 16th Finance Commission as well, where without the 8th Pay Commission, in fact, one of the most anticipated fiscal shock in the next 5 years is the 8th Pay Commission. I think even that we have not endogenized in our fiscal calculation. And to that extent, this whole fiscal calculation of the commission will be very, very short-lived. And there are related to, I mean, then one last point is about GDP revisions. I mean, already we have seen with the 22-23 base year, even the budget numbers have to be recalculated right now. So I'm sure even the Finance Commission calculation also may have to be recalculated. So I think these are some of the risks. Of course, there are other risks which Dr. Srivastava pointed out do have some implications on the overall macro fiscal framework. Let me stop here and thank you so much for patiently.
Thanks, Bhanu, for your presentation. I think your report card is less devastating than that of Professor Srivastava, but also on the whole, you did point out in your polite way the many methodological weaknesses in this report. By the way, just for the record, because you mentioned what I had said about freebies, I had started by saying that there's a disaster race to the bottom by all the states. And I had in that context said that the 16th Finance Commission discusses that quite appropriately, but it treats the central government freebies in a different way. That was my point. So let's now go on to the next speaker. Professor Babu, you're there?
Yeah.
Okay. We are a little bit getting constrained for time. I don't want to squeeze you, but depending on how much time you and Dr. Ranjit take, we'll have that much time for discussion. So please go ahead.
I will be brief and I'll be short. I have a small presentation. Give me a minute. Yeah, I hope it's visible.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. So, thank you, Chairperson, and thank you, Gulati Institute, for this opportunity to be a part of this very important discussion. We earlier had a similar discussion in Chennai where MIDS and Madras School jointly organized, and some of the issues that I'm going to speak is an outcome of the deliberations that we had in Chennai. Well, with the risk of being slightly repetitive, let me start with the
Professor
question
Babu,
of, yeah.
can you move to the presentation mode, because what we are seeing is a constrained thing. I think you have to click, there's a thing for presentation, a slideshow at the bottom of your screen.
Is this better?
No. You'll see a button saying slideshow. Just
I've just put that.
Oh.
Yeah.
Now it's okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Right. So, let me start with this background that, the 16th Finance Commission has chosen not to alter the vertical devolution. And that has been clear from the earlier speakers also. That is, the share of divisible tax pool flowing to the states remain more or less same. But there's a slight change in that, to which I will come towards the end of my presentation. I would say that the focus is more on horizontal devolution. That is how the pool is distributed across states. And in this regard, it departs on three aspects. One, it introduces this whole new kind of a thinking that contribution to GDP as a new criterion has to come in somewhere. Secondly, it revises the definition of demographic performance, shifting from the inverse of the total fertility rate to population between 1971 and 2011 census. And very importantly, to which both the earlier speakers alluded to, it removes tax effort as a criterion. Now, it's also very important to note that the Finance Commission has tightened its role in making recommendations by tying local body transfers to very strict audit and election milestones. And I think it's an important thing. And that needs some kind of deliberation as well. So I would say that there are three important questions that come in this context. One, is there a signal of a shift in terms of shifting towards a performance-based transfers as the cornerstone of a larger architectural shift in terms of sharing of resources? Second, is the fiscal support for the states adequate, especially given the kind of reforms that we are talking about? And one important reform, which has already been discussed, that is the revenue deficit grants issue. And third, the assumptions of nominal growth rate, which Bhanu alluded to, especially with the new GDP series, what is the kind of an implication that it will have on this whole formulas? So let me start with the revenue deficit grant. The revenue deficit grants perhaps is the most consequential change that has come in this Finance Commission's thing. Yeah. Now, we have to keep in mind that the structural squeeze on state finances has deepened because of the erosion of a shareable pool by the proliferation of cesses and surcharges. We know that these have grown to nearly 6.8 trillion. That is a cumulative increase of more than 30% over the last 5 years. Yeah. And since these cess receipts are not always deployed for their statutorily stated purposes, they seem to be a de facto tax revenue for the center. So there are two things there. One, it becomes a de facto tax revenue to the center. Two, it is also not deployed in many cases for the statutorily stated purposes. And these are very, very important issues as far as the states are concerned. So in this context, the revenue deficit grants served as an important compensatory function as they assisted the states that were unable to meet their spending obligations even after receiving their share of tax devolutions. Now, the Finance Commission argues quite, strongly a case for abolishing them, and that is very well documented. The report argues that the actual revenue deficits consistently exceeded the normative deficits that Finance Commissions had projected and sought to compensate. So that is one important point, which again was brought up in the earlier discussion also. So there is a divergence between the actual revenue deficits and what was defined as the normative deficits. So the calculation of this revenue deficit grant itself was a slightly difficult kind of an issue. But even then, it had an important function to serve them. Okay. But what has happened over time is that the number of states that were receiving grants and the total amount that was dispersed grew with each successive commission. We can find that the beneficiary states increased from 8 to 11 and then to 17 over the 3 previous finance commissions. So the revenue gap filling that was done with this revenue deficit grant is creating an ex-ante moral hazard. And that's an important issue because the states then had weak incentives to improve their fiscal positions if their deficits would be covered regardless. Yeah. And it is this moral hazard issue that the Finance Commission is actually highlighting and arguing in terms of the cutting of these revenue deficit grants. But then the question is that in the new scenario, will the adjustment burden fall proportionately on states where fiscal discipline was most lacking? So if you really see what is going to be the burden on states once when the revenue deficit grants are discontinued, then that would give us a different kind of a picture. For example, if you look at the rough calculations on the implications of these revenue deficit grants, we could find that, well, the states that are going to suffer the most could be Punjab, Andhra Pradesh, and Himachal Pradesh, and Rajasthan. And in the case of Assam, one could find that the projected gap due to the abolition of revenue deficit grant could be as high as 0.5% of their GSDP, which is very, very high for a small state. So the important question that arises in this context is about a transition design, which the Finance Commission is silent about. What support exists for states with genuine structural revenue constraint as distinct from willful fiscal profligacy is very, very important to understand here. Now, the transition period needs to accommodate those states which are exposed to adjustment costs. And several states are likely to face large adjustment burden. And these states also have below average own tax and non-tax revenues. Yeah, when I say below average, below the national average of all the big states. So that is going to be a major kind of an adjustment process with which the states will have to cope up. The second important issue in this context is the removal of tax effort as a criteria, because it sits very uneasily with the goal of fiscal self-reliance. So on one hand, you want to have a situation where you want to curtail this moral hazard problem. But on the other hand, you are removing tax effort as a criterion in terms of devolution. So this creates some kind of an uneasiness when you are talking about fiscal self-reliance. Now, the second issue, are the states really getting enough? When we look at the 16th Finance Commission, we see that the 16th Finance Commission adopts the same 41% tax share for the states, which is prescribed by the 15th Finance Commission also. But we also know that the Finance Commissions also recommend absolute grants to the states. Now, if these grants are accepted by the government, the sum of the tax share and grants constitute the aggregate statutory commitments to the states. Now, the 16th Finance Commission prescribes only 2 grants, and both have been accepted. The 15th Finance Commission prescribed 5, out of which 3 were accepted and 2 were rejected. Now, the 16th Finance Commission's overall statutory provision with 2 grants added comes to 44.7% of shareable union tax revenues, which is lower than the 49.3% of the 15th Finance Commission. Now, in this context, it would have been better if the 16th Finance Commission had been little more generous on the 2 prescribed grants, A, for the local bodies, and B, for disaster assistance. And I'll take a minute on both of these. Now, when we look at the disaster assistance, now we can see that the Finance Commission's answer is a kind of a directional change in the way in which we calculate risk. Fund allocation is driven by a refined disaster risk index that treats risk as a multiplicative function of 3 variables, that is hazard, exposure, and vulnerability. Now, under this formula, risk exists where these 3 factors intersect. So, for example, if a storm in a desert is a hazard, but without people getting affected or frail infrastructure, it's not a fiscal risk. So, in a sense, what the Finance Commission does in terms of this new formula to calculate risk, it is signaling that there should be a shift from managing relief to managing risk. And I think the states needs more support in terms of managing risks, and also the states require more support in terms of managing relief. Second, the question of local grants, local body grants. Now, 16th Finance Commission states that there is approximately 7.9 trillion for 5 years. But we also see that around 18.3% of this total is subject to performance conditionalities. And what are these performance conditionalities? Increase in local tax revenue, increase in tax revenue at the state level, raising fiscal transfers to local bodies, etc. And if we are not able to meet this, then these local bodies and the states where these local bodies are operating will be at a disadvantage. In a situation where there are undispersed performance grants, then these performance grants will be deflected to the performers. And here there is a possibility of widening of certain kind of inequalities, especially when we talk about, cities as an engine of growth and the importance of cities in terms of, urbanization process and the pace of urbanization process, etc. So the point that I want to emphasize is that when we have 2 of these kind of recommendations, one for the local bodies as well as for disaster management, perhaps these were 2 areas where the Finance Commission could have been little more generous in terms of its considerations. Finally, I come to the last point, that is the new GDP series, which is creating a kind of a small uneasy relation in this whole calculations. One, we know that economic size itself is now slightly smaller. The absolute size of GDP is about 3 to 4% smaller than the previous estimates. Now, this downward revision for 23 to 26 contradicts a typical base year changes and suggests that there is a correction which is required in the earlier overestimations. The immediate effect is that it puts fiscal pressures. Because the nominal GDP is lower, the fiscal deficit ratio becomes higher. The 25-26 fiscal deficit target increases for 4.4 to 4.5. Debt GDP ratio increases. With the reduced size of the economy, central government's debt increases from an estimated 56.2 to 58.1%. Growth projections have to be reworked now. Manu was talking about how realistic to project growth rates over 5 years. Yeah. So the growth targets are challenged. This whole, size of the economy issue, when we are talking about 5 trillion and things of that sort, now becomes a problem. But very importantly, from a resource mobilization point of view, when we look at 25-26, private consumption expenditure as per the new GDP series is expected to be 195.8 lakh crores in nominal terms. As per the old series, the private consumption expenditure is expected to be 219.6 lakh crores. This basically means that in 25-26, private consumption expenditure is 10.9% lower than the old series. Now, this has got very important implications for the tax revenue calculations and sharing of these resources. Let me sum up 3 points that I want to highlight. One, the success of the reform, that what I call as reform, that is the abolishing of the revenue deficit grants, will depend on whether the states with structural revenue gap receive the support needed to close these through their own effort or not. So it's not very sure how it is going to pan out in recent years. Two, given the present scenario, will the states be getting enough resources, especially with this increase in the pace of urbanization and rising environmental risks? Third, one needs to rework some of these numbers at least with the new GDP series that has come. And the impact of that GDP series need to be factored in, especially when we are talking about the size of the economy and the growth of consumption expenditure. So I'll stop here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brother Babu, for your very concise statements, keeping to the time, and your very, very thoughtful remarks. So we now come to our last panelist, and hopefully after that we'll have reasonable time for discussion. Dr. Ranjit from GIFT, please.
Good afternoon, respected chair and other dignitaries in the hall, colleagues and students. I'm a little nervous by sitting in between all the stalwarts in the area of public finance, including my teacher. So I have few points, few observations. This is actually the culmination of our works. Me and my students have been undergone for the last few months. So I have outlined my presentation in this way. So first I place the background where the issue, why states are important, why states fiscal matters are important, and our understanding about the macro fiscal projections so far, and the previous Finance Commission's observations, states' concerns already raised before the Finance Commissions and their response onto it, and the continuation of certain fiscal anger that have been carried out for the last few commissions, whether that is still justifiable and it is effective. And then the off-budget case, especially I refer this Kerala's case, and then the debt management strategy they have made in the report, and finally my response to the question on the fiscal roadmap they have projected. So, so this is my first slide where I am keeping my background that our director already mentioned that the Prime Minister has already announced that the country, if country needs to grow, the state has to grow first. So there comes the clear picture, the 5 points, that is around 60% of the total government expenditure flows through state budget. That is already reported by many studies that reflect their central role in delivering public service, welfare needs, and other concerns with the limited, revenue raising capacity. And macroeconomic stabilization is primarily a center's concern, but state has to support while safeguarding their developmental and allocation priorities. And third one, subsidiarity principle. Only the closest to government can do the better service, and state confront region-specific shocks, infrastructure demands, socio-economic imperatives, and all other things. Already studies have reported that. And borrowing resources can do wonders. So already we have different views on borrowing, the use of borrowing. It is good or bad. That depends on the situation. But we have certain examples also through which borrowed resources did wonders in different economies. And so we need a calibrated fiscal autonomy within sound finance framework that enables states to invest in infrastructure, human capital, response to shock, drive national growth, altogether the common vision of Vision 2047. So this is the background where both center and state have a crucial role driving the whole country to the Mission 2047. So now comes the understanding. So we all have all our understanding on debt and deficit is based on the theoretical underpinnings. Or we have pessimistic view, we have optimistic view, and your realistic view. According to which, according to pessimistic view, it is detrimental for the economy. That is detrimental for the economy, and also it has burden in the future generation. And optimistic view said it is beneficial, it can stimulate the economy. And we have a realistic view that says that debt is not inherently good or bad. Its impact depends on how, when, and why government borrow. So this is the situation, and Rangarajan Srivastava reiterated this on the basis of Keynesian, neoclassical, and Ricardian framework. So there is no consensus among economists whether debt is good or bad or neutral for the economy. Because in the neoclassical way, it say that it is kind of revenue deficit is nothing but a dissaving, so it will crowd out the private investment, so it is detrimental for the economy. And Keynesian says that it will boost the economy through the multiplier effect, and your Ricardian has you can use the money just for smoothing the tax performance. And anyhow, post World War, especially 1970s, Keynesian principles have dominated. That's the reason why almost all the countries, including India, adopted the deficit financing strategy. And after a period of time, again, the principles have the socio-economic, the political economic principles were again pulled because we have faced a severe debt and deficit patterns in the economy. But on the other hand, borrowing has become an increasingly important source in many subnational finances. We have many countries already reported the subnational cases, and they have used the borrowed money for their, finance. Now, we have already country-based experiences. Almost all the developed countries, they have 100%, above 100% debt, and their financing strategies are different. It's not strictly comparable, but still we can see their pattern. The borrowed money they are using for productive purposes, and they are already in the development domain. And if you see the federal countries' experience, I have some graphs of Australia, Austria, Belgium, Canada. These are all federal countries. So we have already borrowed many federal experience in the transfer ground. Canadian and Austrian experiences, we have already borrowed some of the good practices. And even the debt practices also, we have certain things to borrow. That's what Canadian case, if you see Quebec, they have 38%, state-wise picture, if you see, Quebec, you have 38%, debt. On the other hand, Alberta, you have 10%. So, but based on the structural and cost issues of the different provinces in Canada. So similarly, you have different experience for different federal nations. So debt per se is not bad. So we need to understand the state-wise picture, the state-wise concern, rather than uniformly you are putting a mark and saying you run around. So we have Indian picture. You can see over a period of time based on the deficit, the approach on deficit financing, and then to FRBM targets, then to COVID shock. We have the picture is clearly saying the trend, and because of the FRBM target, we have made the provision to minimize our to limit our fiscal deficit to 3%. Accordingly, we had to in some period we had to cut our expenditure spending patterns to meet the targets. This is our state-wise picture. It's based on 23-24. On the left-hand side, it is total liabilities, and there are some states are having more than 30% debt. On the right-hand side, you have the major component, public debt. Public debt means your internal debt plus loans from center, not the public account liabilities. And if you see the picture, there are some states public account liabilities are more. For example, Kerala, almost 10% is about 10% is public account liabilities. If you are barring that, the situation is below 30%. So like that, the situations are different in each of these states. So I'm saying that the state picture is not uniform. So we have cost disability, we have yield performance are different, your redemption thing is different, your maturity period is different, and all these things are different. But my concern is that the Finance Commission, the 16th Finance Commission, is not taken any of these state-specific considerations because they have already raised some of the cases before the Finance Commission. For example, some states have requested for post-COVID debt relief packages, and some states have approached for NSS restructuring the NSS for NSF loans so that your low interest loan or more maturity period you will get, and some states have argued for the exchange rate risk has to be taken by the sender because some of the on lending, external borrowing through sender, if states are availing that, then sender has to take care of the exchange rate risk. And then some were facing the borrowing, approvals according to 293 clause 3. We have to have sender's permission to go for additional borrowing. That process has issue. And some has raised the concern that your off-budget liabilities like PSUs, special purpose vehicle, all these things are taking your major part of borrowing space. And effective revenue deficit, somebody has raised the concern of considering the effective revenue deficit, that is revenue deficit going for asset creation. And some raised concern on the unused limit can be forwarded to another years. And some have made down the crisis adjusted, flexibility. But all these concerns are basically arguing for greater borrowing flexibilities. At least some flexibility has to be there so that state can perform according to their conditions, their situation, their structure. Finance Commission throughout the period, they have made their own, strategies. Almost 11th Finance Commission onwards, they have made their own attempt to, make the fiscal roadmap for these states and center. Except, this 12th Finance Commission made a FRBM thing and more justified for more institutional way. They have made the recommendations. And except 12th and 14th, they didn't make much, elaboration on many of this subject they have made in various finance commissions. In the last finance commission, they have made the relaxation based on the Uday bonds and COVID. 14th finance commission particularly incentivized. They have made, they have allowed performance-based flexibility like 0.25 for maintaining the below 25%, and your interest payment to revenue receipts is below 20%. You will get another 20.25. 0.25% extra. So that kind of things are there. But in all these cases, 3% rule has remained the main fiscal anchor for state across all the cases. But its impact on capital spending is unclear. Its rationale is weakly validated. It is not well linked with the debt sustainability framework. So this is the point which I want to highlight. Now, if you see, these are actually some of the empirical work. This is based on some of the empirical work we have already undertaken. So Maastricht Treaty, some people are connecting Maastricht Treaty, but Maastricht Treaty is have a different picture. Now, Maastricht Treaty in European Union has flexibility across their member nations. So there are some flexibilities there. And FRBM saving-based justification in the in the 12th Finance Commission case, it has also some issues because the state level saving capacity have shifted, and the uniform target basically ignore the wide variation in the state's revenue and development needs. So we have a small graph to show that the state level saving, because strictly we don't have any data to support that saving performance of states are. But we have a graph which shows based on the CMI CPHS data to show that to show the marginal propensity to save position of each state. It is not same. It is widely varying. So that I will show in the next slide. And one more case during the compliance period when we were under the FRBM target period. Actually, we had to face severe capital expenditure and development expenditure cut during that period. So that is also empirically we have data to show that. And then when fiscal deficit was above 3%, our capital expenditure has increased in some of the states. So if you are putting a uniform case, these are the considerations we are simply ignoring. Now, this is one exercise so we have done based on the CMI CPHS data, and this MBS estimates we have made based on the MBC estimates Dr. Kiran and all made. Based on that, we have made the case, and there are some issues in that we have to, but still the point is that our marginal propensity to save position, our saving capacity, household saving condition is not same. It is varying from, for example, Telangana, if you say 0.72, and on the other hand, if you see Bihar or something, if it is 0.19. So this much variation is there, but we don't have any condition or criterion to take it for uniformly adopting 3% for all the cases. Now, they have already placed their fiscal roadmap, but fiscal roadmap, as per fiscal roadmap, it is like 73.1 they are going to make at the end of this financial year in the award period. And then interstate disparity already they placed, and all these things. But all rule-based consolidation continues. So still 3% is, the whole discussion is revolving around 3%. Fiscal roadmap is not at all based on sustainability analysis, as Professor D.K. Srivastava already pointed out. So, and apart from that, they have made some additional conditions of budget borrowing and all. There are some states actually of budget borrowing is basically using for capital purposes. For example, Kerala Kerala Infrastructure Investment Fund, KIFBI, the whole fund is going for capital expenditure. So if you are bringing all these things, because last few years, the amount we spent, actually we couldn't achieve certain things with the 10 years period that we could achieve within 5 years period because of this off-budget borrowing. So that fund is mainly for including the national highway land acquisition also. So these are the things actually we have used, and that outcome has already made in the economy. So that part now completely curbed out, but at least they could see the pattern of off-budget borrowing across states. They are not seeing the pattern of off-budget borrowing in all states. Not all states, it is not going for the unproductive activities. And your redemption case, as I mentioned, redemption's maturity case are not the same. For some state, the redemption thing or the maturity period is going to get over. So after that, you will get more relaxation for the borrowing limits. So that is also not considered by the 16th Finance Commission. So again, this is also, I already mentioned that while states are major spenders, their borrowing conditions are costlier and riskier than the union. So the states, the center could actually the Finance Commission could make some recommendation by considering this fact. And what we are suggesting is that something called flexible deficit targeting. So that as Professor D.K. Srivastava mentioned that none of the fiscal roadmap or fiscal long-run fiscal trajectory is based on sustainability framework. So we have already two well-established sustainability framework. One is a dormer condition, and that now people are calling as a necessary condition. And another one is bond condition, that is a model-based estimate. Now people are convinced that is a sufficient condition that says that your intertemporal budget constraints are solved. That means your outstanding debt today is equal to the primary surpluses of future, then it is satisfied. So these two conditions are already there, but they haven't in any of this their attempt they have considered this thing, and we have well-established econometric methodologies also to other than the OLS, simple OLS, to establish the sustainability based targeting. So instead of keeping one uniform target for the states as a whole, realizing the capacities, realizing their positions, realizing their redemption rate, your maturity period, and all these things, the states can have this flexible deficit targeting with similar to FIT, flexible inflation targeting. That means 3 plus or minus the band. So that is the thing. We have worked some simulation exercise based on some of the studies. So we have this simulation exercise based on the Rangarajan-Srivastava formula, through which, so I have made one graph because we already have two studies already raised in the central level. One is 46 point. I mean, we can actually, based on this bone model, both the conditions, Domer and bone model, one can establish the threshold value of debt first. And according to which we established, I mean, in one of the paper, we established 46.2 as the threshold limit for the sender. And if we have 11% growth rate, and your 23-24 fiscal deficit is 5.32, and your debt position is 57.13 in 23-24, you can make your projection for 2047. That is our vision, Vikasit Bharat vision. So you can have different strategies on different time periods. Suppose this period's growth rate is less than the previous period, you have to accordingly adjust the deficit limit. So it should be a completely flexible kind. So with the target plus or minus band. So that will be the case. And if you are strictly on FRO review comment is 40%, again if you see the 2047 target it will lie between 3.17 to 4.78 for the sender. Similarly, we have made exercise for Kerala and Tamil Nadu. And there also we could find the band between 2.26 to 3.36 based on the growth strategy, the growth implication. Similarly, for Tamil Nadu also, we have made one attempt. It is between 1.71 to 3.0, but Tamil Nadu is already 13.3. They are in the highest bracket of growth rate, so they can have more flexibility, because the projection says that in the upcoming year their growth rate may increase further. So this is the thing. Actually, we are actually still working on for all the cases like this, the FDT target for all the states, and this is under process. So this is a work in progress. So that's all from my side. I think this is very preliminary work. I think all others can contribute to it. I think. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Ranji. You took us beyond 13 Finance Commission to work that you all are doing on debt service. That's flexible targeting. That's quite good. But we are virtually out of time. I don't know how much, Joseph, how much time can we have for questions? I would like to do that, but that means we cut into your lunch time. So good. So we have some time for discussion. So we are open now for anybody raising questions, comments. Just mention who you're addressing it. Please go with it. Yeah, sure.
Well, I think the session is on macro fiscal framework, and Dr. D.K. Srivastava made a very well laid out presentation. Now, in the past, commissions have said that resources of the country belong to the nation, and they should be applied to places where they are required most, whether it is union or the states. And once you take that, you have to determine what the total volume of resources are. And if you want to determine the volume of resources, you have to put out what is going to be the volume of borrowing that you have to do over a period of time, taking a broad macro fiscal framework. Now, the 12th Finance Commission determined it on the basis of the household sector financial saving. And they said that it was 10% of GDP, and then 1.5% is current account deficit. So 1.5% is required for the public enterprises, 4% for the if you leave 4% for the private sector, you have 6%, so divide between the two. Now, since then, we have never returned to the size of the household sector financial saving. Whatever we are talking about is within that 6% group. Now, the implication is that household sector financial saving has declined over a period of time to 5.5%. From 10%, it has declined. Now, when you have that, given the national income identity, either it will, you will have to depend more and more on foreign savings, or there will be increase in interest rates and there will be crowding out. If that be the case, with the type of assumption which this finance commission has made, what are the implications that you are expecting in the coming years?
Okay, I think we have that
DK,
right numbers. Yeah. And I have that slide back. We have the revised numbers on the household sector financial savings in terms of the new series. And we have looked at the household sector financial savings. This is the latest data available. By the way, it's a very appropriate and good question. And we often miss a discussion on this subject. So I tried to look at it precisely in terms of the issues that Govind is raising. So in 24-25, household sector financial savings amount to 7.1% of GDP. This is in terms of the new numbers with respect to the new series that have become available. In that year, the net capital inflows were 0.6% of GDP, giving us a total investable surplus of 7.7%. So the question that Govind is raising is whether this is still consistent with the 6% target for the center states taken together. Now we can take a call on this, but what has happened is, in the meanwhile, the corporate sector demand on these savings has fallen very drastically. They are, if you look at the entire evolution of borrowing pattern of the corporate sector, they are not really asking for much from or maybe they have been crowded out, whatever might have happened. But their net investment demand on this overall supply of savings has fallen very drastically. So and also the non-government public sector has been contributing to the surplus. Therefore, so in this year 7.7, actually government fiscal deficit was 7.8. That is to say, the government fiscal deficit was enough to crowd out every other sector as far as any available supply was concerned. Whether we can accommodate a 6%, if we suppose we consider 6% as the target, then what is left now is 1.7 percentage point of GDP for the private corporate sector and the non-government public sector. Neither of the two at present are asking for much. So we can take a call on this, whether we can still.
There is a cause and effect problem there. The private corporate sector is not making investment because the interest rates are high, because government is preempting the household sector financial saving. The saving available to the private sector is low. The interest rates are high. At that high interest rate, it's basically a crowding out situation.
Yeah, that is partially true. I think that interest rates, they are getting crowded out. I agree to that. But also what has happened is that the corporate sector was given considerable concessions in terms of the overall corporate tax rate. Their profit ratio increased, and therefore they generated their own surpluses, or their net demand fell. So this is going to be a balance between the two. And we can take a call on whether 6% is still valid or whether we should reduce it. At present, my sense is that we can still retain 6%. This financial savings of household sector is a little higher than what was available in the old series, which was, I think, about 5.2% or so. Now, this one, if it lasts, we have to see whether this will last or not. This 7.1% is a one time phenomenon. I think it happened in 23, 24, 24, 25. 22, 23, it was lower. So we have to see whether this behaves like this or whether there is a change and then redetermine the number. It is quite possible that we can determine the number at a level lower than 6% for the consolidated amount. But I think this is something that we need to continue discussing on and see whether we can finally take a call on this. But a very valid question, I would admit.
No.
I think we have lost connection with Gift.
Yeah, Gift lost connection with all of us. It's other way around.
Or is it a signal that the session has ended?
Maybe that is.
Possibly.
It's already 1:20. So
Yes.
We are crowded out.
yeah.
And the commission lost touch with the
Reality.
realities.
I think someone online is raising hands for questions.
These only those who are online. That boardroom is gone.
Yeah.
Gift boardroom is gone. Shall I try then?
So they're just rejoining in, sir. I just connected with Professor Kiran.
Okay. Yeah.
I think maybe they are finding it to come back.
So there was a network issue, it seems. Their internet had gone down, so they will just sign in again. Right.
So are you joining from Mangalore or Delhi? Professor DK, you're from Mangalore or Delhi?
I'm in Mangalore.
Mangalore, okay.
Before we close the session, we have a memento to pay thanks. Sir, what time shall we join, sir?
think we'll come back at the earliest 2 o'clock.
I'll inform the next.
Joseph, we are back.
I will inform accordingly. That's why.
I think we can leave now, I think, because everyone seems to be leaving.
Sir, can we? Yeah.
I think we can leave or what?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. This is to the panelists. I'm very sorry we lost you.
No, you lost us, sir.
We were there.
Very sorry that technology came in the way. We lost you. There were 1 or 2 questions which I was since DK did respond to Govind's question. I thought I directed to Bhanu, but it's over now, and we assume that the technology telling us time to break for lunch. So we've concluded the session. Thank you all for participating. It went fairly smoothly, even though this was a largely remotely conducted. And I hope we'll see you in the afternoon also.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Only want to add that we were online, only you are offline. We're all connected.
With our Asianet connection, that's what actually happened.
So I hope you have a chat among yourselves.
Yes.
Yes.
Bye. Thank you.
Someday, 2:15. Yeah, 2:15.